I just started with this picture because I think it's really representative of the IVF cycle, of what IVF represents when it's successful. This one in particular, it's a photo that Patricia and Kimberly took after the IVF journey. And it was a journey that took 4 years. They had 7 cycles. They also had 3 miscarriages, and they had 1,600 injections. So they collected all the injections that they had. Just so you know, guys, this is actually a hormone roller coaster. So we actually say in the industry that if you survive IVF, you can survive everything. They collected all the cylinders, and then they took this photo, which is quite amazing, but it's also a bit of, scary, I guess. Okay, before we start, how many people do you think experience infertility in Australia? Just barely.
Total of both sexes?
Just for total of both sexes, percentage, what do you think?
10%.
10%. What do you think? What do you think?
I was going to say 2 or 3 million, which is pretty much 10%.
10%. 20%. Okay.
I'll go in the middle, 50.
Yeah. It's about 17% of the people, but I'm talking people of reproductive age who experience infertility. What I'm trying to say here is that I'm not talking of people who still require fertility services and they don't necessarily experience infertility. I'm talking about lesbians, for instance, so that's not falling into that percentage. So if I add people such as lesbians, single moms who want to use single sperm, the percentage would be a lot higher. At what age do you think women's fertility decreases dramatically?
40?
40?
I'd say 32.
32, oh my goodness, okay.
35?
Yeah. What else? What do you think?
I think
Mid-30s, yeah. What do you think? You too?
35.
35, yeah, it is 35. That's a ballpark figure, so it depends on genetics, depends on lifestyle. Interestingly enough, women are born with all the eggs we'll ever have, so yeah, we actually lose them every time we ovulate, whereas men reproduce sperm all the time. Yeah, men's fertility decreases dramatically around 40, 45. But that, again, that's a ballpark figure. Who do you think experience more infertility issues in Australia, men or women?
Men.
Men, okay. It's about the same. So it's 30% women, 30% men, and the rest is unknown or combined. So what's infertility anyway? Infertility is a global health issue that affects millions of people. So about the World Health Organization says that approximately 186 million people experience infertility. So when trying to find definitions of infertility, you find that there is a lack of uniformity, and so this lack of uniformity affects everything from research outcomes, government reimbursements, health insurance coverage, and so on. In Australia, Medicare and health insurance coverage is based on these definitions, so definitions really matter. So let's see what they say. So the World Health Organization says that infertility is a disease of the male or female reproductive system defined by the failure to achieve a pregnancy after 12 months or more of regular and protected sexual intercourse. So they say it's a disease, and it's mainly defined by the time that you're trying to conceive a baby. And the Fertility Society of Australia, which is the main authority in Australia in the industry, they say that it's an inability to conceive after a couple has had 12 months of unprotected sexual intercourse, or 6 months if you're under 35 years old. So there is, I'm not sure if you think that they are similar or the same, or you don't really see a difference between those definitions, but when looking at these definitions, it's important to know that infertility and sterility are not the same. So sterility refers to the inability or incapacity to get pregnant, whereas infertility refers more to a difficulty. So you could get pregnant, you just need some help. You just might need some help. On the other hand, you could argue that these definitions might not include everyone who needs fertility services. So the LGBTQIA+ community argues that these definitions are discriminatory because they, no matter how long they try to conceive with a protected sex, they just can't get pregnant. So it's a bit of a gray area there. So at least, some people who are infertile, of course, they might argue that these definitions apply to them, but there is a lot of people who still need fertility services, but they are not included in this definition. So while the whole system gravitates around the term of infertility, we find that there's a lot of people who require fertility services and medical assistance who are not necessarily infertile. So who needs fertility services? We have heterosexual couples experiencing infertility, but we also have same-sex couples, trans people, single people, and other. Little bit of history. Little bit of history. So as early as 1819, there was experiments done in animals, in mammals, for IVF, and it wasn't until 1975 that the world's first IVF baby was born. It wasn't until 2 years later that Australia's first IVF baby was born in Australia. So it was born in 1980. In 1983, the world's first IVF baby was conceived using egg donation. In 1984, the world's first baby was conceived using cryopreservation. So that is embryo freezing, so frozen embryos. It's frozen eggs, frozen sperm. In this case, was frozen eggs. Genetic screening to identify embryos without genetic defects. So that's it. That is when a couple has hereditary diseases that they can pass on to their babies. They did some experiments where they deselect the embryos with those hereditary diseases, and they selected the ones without them, so they could have a baby without those diseases. And that was successfully performed in 1999. In 1998, the world's first baby was conceived using sperm retrieved from a dead body. We will go through that later. This is quite controversial. And actually in the Gold Coast just recently last year. So 2022, we had more than 8 million babies born through IVF. That means that 1 every 20 people are born through IVF or assisted reproductive technologies. So it's a lot of people. Infertility landscape in Australia. This is before we go to the nitty-gritty of the debates and everything, just to give you a little bit of a background. The coverage is, in Australia, there's only coverage for people who are medically infertile. So if you go to the doctor, and if you have a medical condition that categorizes you as infertile, you will be covered by Medicare. So if I'm a lesbian and I want to have a baby, but I'm not necessarily infertile, I won't be covered by Medicare. That's what's called social infertility. In terms of demographics, there is a rising age of maternal age. So because women are prioritizing work, we are prioritizing education, we're prioritizing finances, there is a rise of maternal age. And that also increases the infertility rates as well. Social aspects, there is a social acceptance of people using IVF, also particularly the LGBTQIA+ community. In terms of health, we have kind of a problem with obesity, because obesity, that's the graph, so obesity, the trend line of obesity in the population in Australia is going upwards, so that's affecting infertility as well. And there is also people using cross-border reproductive care, which means that people is using reproductive tourism to go overseas to get treatment that otherwise they couldn't get in Australia. For instance, just to give you an example, surrogacy is illegal in Australia, and if you want a surrogate, you will go to Thailand, or just until recently to India. Legislation is highly regulated, but it's, I'm not going through that. I'm not a lawyer either.
So you have the graph for obesity is increasing. So infertility is also increasing.
Infertility is also increasing. So birth rates are decreasing and infertility rates are increasing. Yeah, but that's not just in Australia, that's worldwide as well. So we'll just see that in a second. So as you can see, this is the age-sex pyramid of Australia. So you can see that the young population, the young population here is just much minor. So an expansive age-sex pyramid will look more like with the shape of a pyramid. This one has more the shape of a ball. Here you can see that in the 50s and 60s, the age range of 25, people in their 20s will have more babies. And as you can see, as time goes by, in the nick of time, you can just find how in around this time, people in their 30s have more babies, and it is expected that people in their 40s will have also more babies over time, thanks to IVF. Overall, in Australia, there is lower birth rates, as sorry, your name? Susie said, and also higher demand of fertility treatments as well.
So sorry to interrupt again.
Yeah, that's fine.
My guess would be that the infertility rates are linked to, perhaps there's a link with obesity, but it's also probably linked with the fact that women are having children later and later, and infertility shows up now, where it wouldn't have showed up earlier. If you're having a baby in your 20s, it's easier, and so the actual label of infertility gets applied more often now than it would have in the past.
Yeah, which is a conversation that I think we all need to have a lot more often, because it's a conversation that I had with a lot of my girlfriends as well. Not everybody knew that they had the choice to maybe use fertility preservation or freeze their eggs, but also not everybody knows that with fertility preservation, the success rates are a bit lower than if you preserve your embryos. So if you freeze embryos, you will have a higher success rates than if you freeze your eggs. So these type of things is just things that it's important for people to know, because when they want to have a chance to experience parenthood, they will have a lot more difficulties, because the success rates for assisted reproductive technology, particularly for IVF, success rates pretty much, when you look at them, the message that you get is pretty much that the more money you have and the younger you have, the better. Right. That's pretty much how it works. Because an IVF cycle, it's approximately $10,000. Right. And that's already covering with the government reimbursements. Yeah. So it's a very profitable industry. This is in the world. So worldwide, we get exactly, fret not, we're not alone. This is just worldwide. You can see that fertility trends, this is the births per 1,000 people, so it's just decreasing. And this is the number of treatments, birth rates of patients, IVF patients per age. So it's obviously increasing over time. Before I go here, I was gonna play a video. I was gonna play a video of Robert John Aiken, who is a British reproductive biologist and widely known for identifying oxidative stress as a significant contribution to infertility. And I just find him very interesting. But I need to play this video. So it's here. Just gonna skip the sensationalism of the
for the future. Good boy.
Professor John Aiken is from the University of Newcastle and is one of the world's leading reproductive biology experts. Joins us now. So, Professor, we're having fewer babies. Why is that a crisis?
Well, it's a crisis because it's something that's happening not just in Australia, but happening actually all over the world. Since the late 1960s, we've seen a global decline in fertility rates. We're seeing increased rates of people attending infertility clinics. In some countries now, up to 10% of the population is produced by IVF. And there's been a real change in male reproduction. Sperm counts have halved in the last half century. But if we're not prepared for it, then it's going to be a very sudden change. And I think what I'm trying to do with the book I've just published is to engineer a soft landing. People have to be aware that population numbers are going to decline quite dramatically and prepare for that. If we're not prepared for it, then I think chaos may ensue, and we don't want that. So,
when you say, to avoid the inevitable chaos that will ensue, what does that look like? What does fewer people on the planet look like in terms of how we age and how we deal with aged care, all those sorts of things? Can you paint the picture a little bit about why we need to make sure we have a soft landing for this?
There are a couple of things here. So first of all, our economies are very go in lockstep with population numbers. So the Australian economy has increased dramatically over the last 30, 40 years in partnership with the population numbers. So we don't have the population numbers, we won't have the relentless growth of the economy. With declining fertility, what we have now is a population pyramid which is turned on its head. We have a small number of young people working furiously to maintain a large population of elderly people. And that's an unsustainable situation going forward. And it's no wonder the fertility rates are falling if the younger members of society are so preoccupied generating the resources to keep the older members of society in the way to which they've become accustomed.
So what's the solution?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question. So what are the solutions? So first of all, we have to try to understand the phenomenon. So why have sperm counts halved in the last 50 years? Why are so many couples infertile? Some of it's due to maternal age, but a lot of human infertility is unexplained. The other thing we have to do as a society is to recognize our biology. We're a very unusual species in that we stop reproducing in midlife. By the age of 35, fertility is declining in women, and by the age of 40, 41, 42, it's gone. We can't kind of ignore that. We have to engineer society around our biology, not expect our biology to adapt to our social needs. So those are quite sort of profound things that have to be done. The other thing we have to do is to make it easier for younger couples to have children. And that's to do with Scandinavian style parental leave schemes that will be supportive of young couples wanting to have families without endangering their professional careers.
Where does choice come into it? The choice to perhaps not have kids or only have 1 or 2 kids?
Well, I think choice is exactly what we're trying to achieve. So as a reproductive biologist, if you ask me what my ambition in life is, well, it's to provide people with choice so that they can have exactly the number of children that they want. And in order to enable that, we have to do 2 things. We have to provide safe, efficient means of contraception, and we have to provide a deep understanding of the causes of human infertility so we can alleviate them or prevent them, preferably. If we just keep reaching out to IVF all the time, there are going to be major implications for the future. Currently in Australia, 7% of the population is generated by IVF. In other countries, it's 10%. That's a kind of unsustainable situation for the future, and we have to get a better handle on what's causing the infertility and prevent it rather than just treat it when it appears.
What about the idea of freezing eggs at a young age, allowing women to have children a bit later with the financial stability and perhaps when their careers are more established, if that's something they want, but without some of the obstacles that come with having a baby a bit older? Or does that present a whole lot of new obstacles doing something like that?
No, I think that's a very sort of rational choice for young women to make. The one thing you have to be aware of is that it's not inevitable that once you've frozen your eggs and they've been thawed, that they will generate a child for you. It's quite a different thing from embryo freezing. With embryo freezing, we can pretty much guarantee high rates of fertility. But with egg freezing, it's not so certain.
Well, it's been a great chat, Professor. Maybe we need to find a way for men to be able to have the kids as well. Get the show on the road, help us out.
Well, it's certainly a couple of things. It's not just about female fertility, it's also about male fertility. And we just need to understand a lot more about the process so that we can manage it better.
Carrie, just leave us and our low sperm counts alone. Professor,
Well, I'm
thank
just
you for
saying,
your
if
time.
you could carry the baby as well, it really broadens our options. I mean, that's all.
Thanks, Professor.
Thank you.
Every man will agree that they would do it, because we'll never be asked. John's book, The Infertility Trap.
Anyway, so this, I think the question with this man particularly, because he raised the issue that oxidative stress is higher in the population. You know, are we really taking care of ourselves? Is that the reason why we are more infertile, mainly more than other factors, or is it a combination of all of them, really? Okay, so some fertility treatments include in vitro fertilization, which in Latin means fertilization in the glass. That means that that's just when in the lab the nurses and the scientists just put the sperm and the egg on a laboratory dish just to fertilize on their own overnight. Intracytoplasmic sperm injections, which is more diagnosed for couples where the male is infertile, or the sperm has low motility, the sperm has low quality for whatever reason. That's when you do intracytoplasmic sperm injections, and that's a photo in the background, by the way. So that's when, that's when you get a so in the laboratory you select one sperm and you inject it directly into the egg, which is obviously different. You're pretty much doing all the job for the sperm, because again, this is more for male infertility treatments. We have also pre-implantation genetic screening. We'll touch this topic later. This is quite controversial. This is the selection or deselection of embryos, and that includes it's usually done to deselect embryos that do not have hereditary diseases. But these days it's also done to select, designer babies. So you select babies with blue eyes or blonde, or even if I want to have a deaf baby or a deaf with dwarfism, and that's possible in the United States these days, as well as sex selection, and that's through IVF as well. We have also fertility preservation. So for fertility preservation, people who need to freeze their eggs, and freeze their eggs is people who haven't found their partner, who want to delay parenthood. Those are the obvious ones, but there is also more people who need these services, who are also transsexual people who want to undergo surgery and take the hormones, and also, well, pretty much anyone. It's just another option. Using donors, it's again another option. So particularly sperm donors are used mainly for lesbian couples. Egg donors, you can also use it. Heterosexual couples use them as well when they have any underlying infertility conditions. So if I can't use my own eggs because I have any infertility condition, then I will use an egg donor. So it's just again another option. Any underlies under the fertility treatments and options that you have. There is also gestational surrogacy, which is using a surrogate to host the embryo of you and your partner. There is also traditional surrogacy, but that's when the surrogate uses their own eggs, so that's when the surrogate is the biological parent. And we also have intrauterine inseminations, which is known as artificial insemination, or the turkey basta, which is pretty much you just take a catheter and insert the sperm on the uterus of the future mother. Types of infertility, we got primary infertility, which is when a couple struggles having a first baby. Secondary infertility is when they have already a baby, but they struggle having the second one. And then by Medicare coverage, we have medical infertility and social infertility. Any questions so far? Am I going too fast? So medical infertility, it's when an underlying medical condition impedes you to get pregnant. So it can be for women, abnormalities in the ovaries, abnormalities in the uterus or the fallopian tubes, and more. For men, can be low levels of sperm, absence of sperm, abnormal shape, low motility. I've seen photos of sperm with two heads. It's quite, apparently it's more common than it seems. So there is a lot of issues that you can have to be categorized as medically infertile. In Australia, if you are diagnosed as medically infertile, then you will have access to Medicare coverage. Social infertility, on the other hand, it's pretty much everything else. So it's someone who requires fertility treatments or medical assistance to achieve their dream of parenthood, but they are not necessarily infertile. So those are same-sex couples, trans people, older people, or single women as well, and other people who are asexual. So do you think the definition of infertility is discriminatory as part of the LGBTQI+ community argues, or should social infertility be covered by Medicare? It's tricky. So let's go to the fun part of the presentation. We got some legal and ethical considerations worldwide. Legislation comes into play at every stage of a fertility treatment. So from the very first moment, whether you will be allowed fertility treatment on a first instance. For instance, in China, people only can access to fertility treatments if they are heterosexual and they're married. Otherwise, they can't. It just comes into play at every single stage. In Spain, for instance, as well, if you want a donor, you're not allowed to choose your donor. The clinic will choose it for you because they preserve the anonymity of the donor. And that has what's happened out of that is that there's been a lot of moms rejecting their own children because they just don't see that they look like them, and they just reject them. So it's really controversial. And what happens when you have such a huge complex landscape is that there is regulatory differences that might bring reproductive tourism for people just to travel around the world to find options that are suitable for them. The problem with that is that it brings legal, health, and moral questions or considerations that I think we need to take into account. So some of them will be the use of donor and sperm, the use of donor and sperm, the use of donor sperm and eggs. So should the use of donors be anonymous or not anonymous? Should they be altruistic or commercial? Should they be selected by the clinic or by the person that actually has to have the donor? And that seems like an obvious question, right? But it's really not easy. When you look at this landscape, you have to take into account the rights of the donor, the rights of the donor-conceived person, and the rights of the parents. And most of the times, all those rights conflict. So it's really tricky.
Sarah,
Yeah.
can I ask you a question? So just say in the Spanish system where it's anonymous, and just say you got a sperm donor,
Yeah.
would they let you know any details about the person? So would you know ethnicity and intelligence level or anything like that, or would it literally be you give birth and it's like that's what my kids
Yeah,
look
there you go.
like?
Exactly. Yeah, I know. It's allowed now, so you are allowed to see the basics, but before you were not allowed to see pretty much anything. You were just given a donor and you were just going to the clinic thinking and assuming things that you probably shouldn't be assuming. And that has brought into the issues that I was mentioning before, is that many moms were rejecting their babies after giving birth. And so they've solved that issue by giving basic information, but they're not giving a lot of information. Like in Australia, for instance, you can choose, you can see occupation of donor, you can see a photo of when they were a baby, sometimes, you can see the hair color, the eye color, you can see their interests, you can see here everything, which I think it's fair, it's gonna be your donor, right? But, and it's still not necessarily, there is a lot of questions and a lot of considerations to take into account, because most of that information can be identified. You can identify that one person with all that information at some point. It's a gray line there.
So what happens if the donor, the sperm donor, doesn't declare congenital, like major congenital health issues, and the person, the woman receiving the donor sperm is totally unaware of that? And I mean, we're talking some major disabilities.
Absolutely. So there is mainly two different types of donors. So it's the clinically recruited donors and known donors. So clinically recruited donors are the ones that I'm talking about here. So those are clinically recruited. So they are being recruited through a clinic. And they have gone through a series of pathological tests and also counseling, which is the case in Australia. Known donors are donors that, let's say that I am, if I have my lesbian partner and I want to have a baby, then I might know someone who might be willing to be a donor, and it's a friend of ours for many years. We trust him, but we just don't know that he had some health issues. In most of the cases, in most first world countries, in Australia, you will also undergo some pathological test to this known donor. But in some countries, they just don't do that because they prefer not even. In some places, they just don't want to spend the money, and they don't even undergo IVF, which means that they are conceiving naturally with that donor. So that's definitely a risk. Yeah, for sure. There's also a lot of Facebook groups in Australia with people who don't want to spend all the money that involves in vitro fertilization or intrauterine insemination, and they try to contact men who are willing to donate their sperm, and they give it in a cup immediately after they contact them, and they deliver the sperm to their place, and that's happening here in Australia. Hey. And then what these women do is that they buy a catheter. You can buy it in any pharmacy, and they insert the sperm directly into the uterus. So it's extremely dangerous, and many people are doing that. So it's something that, again, it's a conversation that has to happen in the community, so these women are aware of all the diseases that not just that they can get themselves, but also the baby they want to have can they can pass it on. So yeah, for sure, that's why it's important to go to a clinic and to get them checked, and that can be both with a known donor. Clinically recruited donors will always have pathological tests done and counseling as well, so they understand what it means. But that's in Australia. So in the States, it's a really big topic, right? Because in Australia it is altruistic, so it has to be altruistic. They are not paid, but in the States they're paid thousands. So, however, in Australia, you're not allowed to pay the donors, but clinics are allowed to pay donors from overseas. So while local donors have to be altruistic, overseas donors can get paid for it. So the clinic will get overseas donors, they pay for that if they know that patients here will be interested, which they are, because there is a shortage in Australia of donors. And yeah, they will just buy them from the States, which usually in the States, again, in the United States, they are paid thousands of dollars, but there is a lot of controversy there because when they are paid, most of them, they want to pay unit fees. So that would make you think that maybe they are too young to understand the consequences of donating as well. But yeah.
So the controlling of donors is a federal issue in Australia. There aren't any differences between states.
There is differences between states, but people also move around the states to get the legalities that suit their needs as well. And they also travel overseas as well. Yeah. So there is a limit of families that the clinic can set up. In Victoria, there is a limit of families that you can have with a donor, which is 10. In Queensland, the legislation doesn't put such a limit. The clinics do that themselves because they can get into a lot of trouble, and no clinic wants to be into the next press release the day after, because that will ruin their reputation. But there is a lot of gaps in the legislation still, even here.
So altruistic versus commercial, which model is more common around the world?
Altruistic or commercial? I think there is a little bit of it's a bit of a mix. Just let me check. So there is a little of a mix, whether it's altruistic or commercial. There is a lot of countries where you can actually purchase your donor. You can pay them. And that brings actually the question, if they do it because they need to, not because they want to, and if they do it because they need to, do they really understand the consequences of donating? So there's a lot of questions that you need to ask there. And again, in the States, they are paid thousands of dollars to donate, and mostly they are young people who want to pay their unit fees, which are really expensive. So it's quite tricky. But yeah, in Australia, the donation of reproductive organ tissue is altruistic. They are also reimbursed for admin fees, such as commuting to the clinic or taking time off from work. But in saying that, women are paid exactly the same amount that men, and donating eggs is a completely different process than donating sperm altogether. So just don't want to forget anything. Some considerations between anonymous versus not anonymous. It's that here there is two rights that conflict. So it's the right of information to the donor conceived person, because what happens with if I'm a donor conceived person, I might just ask myself, who am I? Where am I come from? And those are questions that are ingrained to my identity, right? Who am I? And that also has an impact potentially on my mental health as well. So I might want to know who is my biological father, right? So those are the rights. That's the right of the donor conceived person. But there is also a right of the donor to be anonymous. The right to privacy, right? So if they want to remain anonymous, that's also the right as well. So that's something to think about. Another consideration to take into account is that countries where donors are anonymous, they have a lot more donors. So that gives couples a lot more options when it comes down to fertility treatment as well.
You do hear the odd story about, one man making multiple donations.
That's the video that I was gonna play now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really creepy. It gives me the creeps. Yes. So yeah, for instance, some legalities, as I was mentioning before, in Greece, anonymity is guaranteed by legislation, but in the UK, it's not allowed. So in the UK, you just can't be anonymous if you want to be a donor. That's how different legislations can be. In Australia, donors remain anonymous only until the child is 18 years old. So once the child turns 18 years old, they have the right to know who their donor was. They don't know where he lives, but once you know the name and surname, you just go ahead, find Facebook, and it's quite easy to reach out to that person. What else? So selection of, as I mentioned before, in Spain, the anonymity is just taken so far away that the clinic is the one who selects the donors, because they just want to preserve the anonymity so far. It's so precious there in Spain that the clinic selects the donor, and that has brought a lot of issues, like I said before, women rejecting their own babies, which is really sad.
So I mean, while the child might not know the identity of the father,
Yeah.
like, does he have the right to know at least the genetic information of
The genetic information, as in
the donor? Yeah.
what type of genetic, as in
Like whether I have any genetic problems because of my,
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned before, when you use a clinically recruited donor, they go through a series of pathological tests, so you can rest assured that they will not have any issues. So that's the positives of using a clinically recruited donor. It's different from a known donor, and just using a turkey buster, then you just don't know. And also the donor might just say, well, see you later, you won't know anything about that person. But if it's a clinically recruited person, you will definitely have the guarantee that you're completely covered from a health point of view.
However, mental illnesses cannot be screened.
Mental illness, no, there is, yeah.
If you have a kid that grows up and sadly develops or falls into schizophrenia or something, just devastating like that.
Absolutely, yes. These questions are asked in Australia, so and you also get some health history from the parents of the donor as well. You don't get it from the grandparents, as far as I'm concerned, but you do get history, the blood type, any pathologies of the parents. Obviously, if they have any pathologies, the sperm is not viable anymore to be recruited. But yeah, you do go through a series of. It's quite strict, particularly.
It's contingent on self-disclosure.
But it's exactly, yeah. It depends on if you want to say that or not, which is, yeah, you can be a psycho, which has happened many times. There has been donors, which we called in the industry serial donors, which are people who just want to populate the world with their sperm or their eggs, and they just donate, and they just move around. They even travel. When they can't, when the clinic in that place, they just tell them, you can't donate here anymore. We just have too much of your sperm. Thank you for being so altruistic. But they go travel into a state that they travel to another country to donate their sperm because they just got to keep doing that.
Aren't these loopholes in the medical legislation worldwide? Like, for example, it's been only recently that if you pop around to your local pharmacies, you can, and you've got different doctors, you can grab a whole bunch of pseudoepidural or whatever your fancy is.
Yeah.
The same with, there's no international database to say that Joe Bloggs was
a donor.
Yeah. And then he went over there and.
Yeah, not from fertility companies. There are companies such as Ancestry that you can use to find out this type of information, I guess.
But Ancestry is really kind of like novice-y stuff.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about is like a regulatory international cooperation.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just so many holes.
So many holes, yeah. Yeah, I
and
agree. And clinics should talk between each other as well. And not just from a state point of view, and not from a national point of view, but from an international point of view, you should be, I do. And I remember listening to this conversation as well, where I used to work, definitely there is an opportunity to have a database where you have all these donors with a code that's unique and that's global for that donor, and you can just identify him and follow him up no matter where he goes. So that's still a project that's really hard to set it, to put in place. I think it would be easier to set it up at a national level, but not globally.
Well, also because it's privatised. I mean, I'm interested to hear you refer to it as an industry, not a field, like field medicine.
Yeah,
it's an
yeah.
industry.
It is. It's a huge industry. It's very profitable. It's very profitable. Yes, which is one of the things that I think we need to also discuss as well. It's what are the boundaries of the profit of this industry? Because that's something that I'm just going to talk about just a bit later, which is there was this case of a doctor who, because he just wanted to please the patient, because the patient paid a huge amount of money. She wanted to have transferred 12 embryos at once. That usually you will transfer. There is countries where there is a single embryo transfer policy. That's how bad it is to have 12 transferred at the same time. And she had 8. She had 8 babies. It's really dangerous for the mom and for the baby. So yeah.
Did all the donor, was it the same donor or different donors?
For the
She
8,
wanted the 12, yeah, she wanted 12.
it was the same person.
That's a relief.
Same person.
I mean, I know I'm being cynical, but
no, yeah.
This is the tragedy of human life.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was just wondering if the potential parents are sort of counselled on all these potential risks. I mean, that would go against the financial interest to potentially turn them off. But I mean, shouldn't there be some responsibility for making sure that these are the things that could happen?
Like you're talking about donors, like
yeah,
this and
all of the potential risks. But
yeah, they're always informed. I do find though, I think that when people go to a fertility clinic, they've tried everything, and they are in a position where they just want it so badly.
But the thing is, therein lies the rub. You can know a lot about science, medical science, biology, or you might know you might be 40 and you might not.
Yeah.
And therefore you might be so desperate to have a child, but totally ignorant
Absolutely.
about, autism or whatever's out there, the physical disability type things, which are serious.
Absolutely.
And you just these people don't have the capacity to understand because they don't understand what it means.
Yeah.
They can't imagine themselves at age 50 still pushing a child around. Because I have worked in a quite special needs school.
Yeah.
And some of these kids,
Yeah.
And so parents like that, they don't have a clue because they've not probably been in that environment.
Yeah.
Therefore, the more you want the child, the greater the risk you're prepared to take.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, there are studies that prove that there is a higher emotional involvement of parents who undergo IVF because they've gone through so much. They usually, and this is a study that's been just released recently, where it's been proved that parents who have who undergo IVF, they want it even more. And it's also kind of, I know it's not kind of directly related, but it is in a sense that they might not care as much. They might not care as much.
Their priorities
and their priorities are to have a baby. Which is interesting because again, in the industry sometimes I think some rights are in conflict, and some of those rights that are in conflict are the rights of the offspring or the baby. Sorry, the baby and the parents, which are at conflict. That might happen as well.
The other thing to bear in mind too is that oftentimes there'd be a high percentage where it's the partners that are conceiving
the parents,
the man and the woman in some kind of bond of living together. Like, okay, so husband and wife are married, can't can't conceive, therefore they'll produce their own child, but it'll be done in the lab.
Yeah, but what do you mean
so
by
we're
that?
not having to worry so much about the ethical considerations of donor sperm. What I'm saying is there are other people who are being given the opportunity to create their own baby, they just need some help to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess what I'm saying is that it's not all doom and gloom. It's not
No.
all donor sperm not knowing stuff.
It's already in a grey area. Yeah, it's really tricky. Sorry, you had a question.
Yeah, I think just to follow your point, all of the issues about screening for autism and all of the issues that we raise here, what are we comparing them against? All those people, millions of people out there just bopping their asses off right now with and having sex, no auditing, no autism screening,
No auditing.
nothing.
No auditing. Someone
Ethical considerations being taken into account, yes or no? I mean, what's the base?
Actually, can I
Does
just...
that make sense?
Well, yes, but
We're sorry, what we're doing is,
Sarah,
we're here,
yeah.
what I think we're doing is, saying, well, let's set a standard here,
Yeah.
but above what?
But if we-
Above the average copulating couple,
Yeah, but
who
if you...
have none of this sort of input.
If Sarah gives you the details for, we watched a short clip
Okay.
from what was it, a biologist, an infertility or
Yeah.
fertility biologist.
It's a biologist.
And basically what he's doing is future trending as well. So yeah, so that'll give you a picture of.
But yeah, mainly also I just want to add quickly that babies who are born through IVF as well, because we have pre-implantation genetic screening, which I will go through to that later, which is really, really controversial. You can also select embryos that are healthy through IVF, which is something that you can't do if you conceive naturally a child. So if something, you will have more chances to have a healthier baby through IVF. But on the other hand,
Well,
it's what this man said, it's not healthy as well to have a population in which most of the population wants to undergo IVF instead of being educated and conceive naturally a healthy baby, you know.
But just one thing, I think it's if you reach the age of 36 now, your doctor speaks with you about an amniocentesis because of the risk of Down syndrome.
Yes.
So even though you might conceive with the help of IVF, but you're a couple, you are still, the discussion is still held so that you know the risks.
Yeah.
Because
There are
as we, what was it, the fertility rate drops off at 36.
Yeah. Women's fertility decreases dramatically at that age. Yes.
The quality.
The quality of the ovarian quality decreases as well. Inside that's a ballpark figure again. Generally, that's the number.
I would like to say that work with kids.
Yes.
Yeah. So then, do you have an idea like how many of those kids actually came from, they end up with autism from IVF, and the one that just so you
the facts aren't there, but the facts are that you can't screen for. You can screen for certain congenital conditions, certainly not mental illnesses, but the rise in autism is worrying.
But you can't screen with a natural birth anyway. You've still got that risk. So
But that's what I'm
risk
saying, because there are certain. Remember this chap that
from
Professor Aitken. Basically, that's what he was saying. Is not only is using IVF unsustainable in the future, but we also need to be aware of the fact that some diseases, serious illnesses, are going to mutate's not the word, but what I'm saying is just through successive generations, they're going to worsen, and that's, for example, autism has the numbers have increased exponentially, and it's still not known what causes
the underlying reasons. I think it's just something, in the end, technologies advance, and this is not just with assisted reproductive technologies, it's with any technology. They just advanced much faster that legislation can actually catch up with. So usually it won't be until there are more studies and universities is making more studies and there is more findings, so we can understand better what are the consequences and what can we do about it, I guess. Yeah, unfortunately it will be, it's a cheat sandwich, yes. So we need to find out first what's, yeah.
Let's just ask you, Sarah, you spoke about parents rejecting their children on whatever basis. I was wondering, I mean, with the amount of money and the emotional investment in these children, are there higher instances of abuse or rejection, you know, than there would be in
abuse or rejection of the actual child?
Yeah.
Only in cases like, for instance, in Spain, because if you're not able to choose your own donor and you're not able to know information about your donor, you might give birth to something that you just don't feel attached to for any superficial reasons some people might think, but maybe the mom just doesn't feel attached to the baby, and that there's been cases of that. Rejecting the baby through IVF, I wouldn't say so, because they go through, it's a roller coaster. You get injections to stimulate the creation of follicles, and that's a lot of emotions that you experience when you're undergoing IVF. When you have finally the baby, it literally feels like a miracle. And there is, again, it's been studies that prove that the parents who undergo IVF and succeed and they have a baby, they are more emotionally involved with babies but you know, this has been a study with a sample. It's been made in Australia. You know, it's still a question mark, but yes, there's been studies.
About the sort of long-term development of that child, whether there would be undue expectations. You know, I've put so much money, so much of my time, so much of myself into this, and
absolutely, it could be, yeah, and how much you cry and you're not letting me sleep, right? Like, yeah, come on, just be a little bit more grateful. Yeah, could be.
Yeah.
Well,
I was just wondering if it's perhaps a higher percentage of dissatisfied parents, you know.
Dissatisfaction. This is not what I paid for. Maybe. Maybe. I don't know. Yeah.
Sarah, does the industry encourage counselling or some form of guidelines, or is it actually available? Even though the anxiety concerns the person, people might not want to know, but the point would be, is it actually available?
Counseling is mandatory in Australia. For instance, for people who want to become donors, it's mandatory. So you kind of, that's also answering your question before, just trying to find whether they have any psychological, underlying psychological issues that DNA can tell you about. Couples undergo counseling as well.
The parents, I mean, the recipients.
The recipients, yeah. So if I want to undergo IVF, if I want to become a mom, I will have to go to counseling, and usually it's 2 counseling sessions are covered. Let me tell you, that's just not enough. Usually, I remember working at the clinic at the company that I used to work. You just get a lot of people crying every day on the fertility center. They just cry on the phone, just call you every day. You definitely need a psychologist that you're gonna have to pay yourself, or you just can get a plan with a psychologist afterwards, because it's really, you definitely need counseling and a psychologist. It's encouraged, but there is only 2 sessions that are covered for couples who want to do IVF. It's not everything that you might need.
Medicare comes.
Medicare, yes, yeah.
Thank you for this presentation. It prompted me to follow through on Greg's recommendation at SBS, and also I looked at a TED talk, and I was thinking to myself, I know absolutely nothing about it.
A TikTok?
People in the family.
TikTok, sorry. You're so.
You know, people in our family have undergone this experience, and normally the conversation's fairly benign, and now I understand after looking at these particular YouTubes the reason why.
Yeah.
But I thought to myself, well, if it's so simply explained there, and I'm a man, and I can grasp some of these aspects, would that be a format that would be considered more inviting or acceptable to people becoming, looking for a donor? Would that type of presentation be more simple than what's offered within the industrial area.
Do you mind just to rephrase the question? Sorry, I'm not sure if I understood.
I'm thinking about how the counselling takes place. Is it a formal sheet or is it a pretty sort of structured talk from a
It's a structured talk, and yeah, as far as I know, it's just a structured talk, informative, and just trying to listen to that person. Obviously, if you require a more specialized psychologist, they are expensive, as you know, in Australia. You know, it can be anything from 200 an hour, and so it's, yeah.
That particular TED talk I looked at was a lady that gave her entire experience over the period of time it took her to have a child.
Yeah.
And it was all presented quite articulate in about 20 minutes. Like it's the actual experience of other people. If a person is going to have this treatment and they get exposure to other experiences, I'm not saying to put them off, because the people involved that I looked at persevered, and eventually were successful. Inspiring, if you know.
Yeah, there is so many inspiring stories for sure. Thank you so much. I'm just gonna keep going.
Quick question.
Yeah.
So in Australia, do donors have the right to information? Like, do they have the right to find out where and who the children are?
No.
Okay.
No, they don't. Not at all. Unless the child, it just comes from the child when they turn 18 years old, if they want to find out and just not just find out about his details, but also connect with them somehow. But the donors can't do anything. So that's what they need to be aware of for sure. Well, we went through, anonymous, not anonymous, it's definitely an issue, altruistic or commercial. As I said, it is altruistic in Australia. People are paying thousands in the States. However, in Australia, you can pay for overseas donors. It's a tricky topic. This is a Netflix show that I really recommend you to watch. I'm just actually going to play the video because it's really interesting and it's on topic regarding sperm donors. It's called Our Father, and it's going to give you the creeps, so just spoiler alert.
Growing up, I felt different. I was 35 and I take...
Oh shit, I'm sorry.
When I opened up Ancestry, I had over 3,000 hits.
All of these random names were popping up and it said close family.
We all matched the name Klein.
Dr. Klein was the best infertility doctor in Indianapolis.
Right then, I knew Klein was our biological father. So that's when strange things started happening.
I think it was some sick experiment for him.
Most of us have blonde hair, blue eyes. It was almost like this perfect Aryan clan. It's disgusting.
How the fuck did no one know? For decades.
I had to tell my husband, we're just now finding out that Julie is not yours.
I reached out to every news outlet, big and small.
This was a person of a position of power. He's known in our community as a philanthropist. He's an elder of the church.
And the Attorney General's office.
I don't deny that it was a sexual violation, but legally, there's just no crime that touches this particular act.
The majority of us live in a 25-mile radius of each other. I walk around and I can be related to anyone. I dread every new match that comes, but they just keep coming.
You're praying. Please don't let it be somebody I know. Please don't let it be somebody I dated.
He wants me to keep quiet, but I will never back down. I will fight to expose all of your secrets.
He's hiding something more sinister.
Okay, so this is not just a movie. It's based on a true story. And what happened here is that this doctor, he worked in a clinic. So let's say he worked in a clinic where all the couples or all the people.
He told me once 6,000 children are on Earth.
Okay, maybe that's too explicit. I lost that video. It's okay. Anyway, so what happened with this doctor is that he had a clinic and couples who were experiencing infertility issues were going to the clinic, And many of those people were women who didn't have a partner and they just wanted to use a donor. So this doctor will go and use his sperm as a donor. And so that's where the lawyer of the doctor would say he hasn't done anything wrong, because these people have a contract where they say, I accept to have donor sperm in order to conceive. But the problem is also that he didn't undergo any pathological issues. He didn't undergo any counseling. He didn't go all the process that a donor should be undergoing. Also in the States as well. No, it's not as thorough as it is in Australia. I guess it also depends on the state as well, but it didn't pass any of these tests. So this doctor in particular had some diseases that he passed into all 100 offsprings that he had. 100 that it was found, I think, I'm not sure how many in total, but the problem with that is that if you go to a clinic, you will go to the closest clinic available, and all the people who had babies around that clinic will have babies, approximately during the same time frame. And it's people who might potentially meet each other, and they might have dated, they might have even get married between them, and they were siblings. They just didn't know that. So it's been very controversial. This is what we call in the industry serial donors. So it's people who, again, they just donate a lot, but I'd say also this wouldn't qualify as a donor. He just wanted to fertilize as many people as possible with his sperm, even though when couples went to the clinic saying, I want to use the sperm of my partner, he would still use his sperm.
That's not a crime?
It is a crime, it's a crime, but in the case of this man, because he was really well known in the community and he had a lot of power, he was discharged, I think, $500. And he didn't go to jail. So instead of being penalized for 100 crimes or 100 offsprings, it was penalized just for one crime only. And yeah, it's quite frustrating. But yeah, that's the case of this one. Let's go through the next topic. So we go through preimplantation genetic diagnosis or embryo selection. So preimplantation genetic diagnosis is a technique used in fertility treatments to select or deselect embryos based on their genes. For medical reasons, you can deselect the embryos that have hereditary conditions, the hereditary conditions that the couple might pass on their offsprings. But preimplantation genetic screening is also used to select embryos that have particular characteristics that the couple want the baby to have, and that goes from sex selection, which is the case that we're just going to go through now, but it also covers if you want to choose the eye color of your baby, the hair color of your baby, and more. You can also choose that as well in some countries. That's not legal in Australia. In Australia, you can't choose the sex of your baby. You can't select how your baby is going to look like. You can even only use preimplantation genetic diagnosis to make sure your baby is going to be born healthy. But in many countries, and again, this is where the differences in legislation allow reproductive tourism for couples who want, a girl instead of a boy. And I am fully aware that there is a lot of couples in Australia who travel to the States to have a boy or to have a girl. And that's actually happening. So it's the difference in legislation what's really up for a debate. So in the case of preimplantation genetic diagnosis, again, some people might say I have a hereditary condition and I want to make sure my children it's not born with it. And then some people might just say I just have 3 boys and I think it's just time to have a girl. And some people, there is just a debate as well that says that some preference is an issue in many countries and it is a form of discrimination and affects the sex ratio at birth. And that happens in many countries where they prefer, because of the culture of their backgrounds, they prefer to have a boy. And I'm just gonna play a video that explains that really well. That happens, I'll play the video. So that happens in countries in East Asia, South Asia, Middle East, North Africa. So they prefer a son because they have usually a higher wage earning capacity. In India, daughters carry the expense of the dowry, so they just might prefer a boy. And they also, the sons continue the family line because it just keeps, their children will have the surname of the family. And in South Korea and China, Confucian values and patriarchal family systems make families to prefer a boy. Just gonna play this video. No, that's not good. It's different from my So this is from gender-biased sex selection in Georgia, but it explains really well what's happening in many other countries as well.
Is this Georgia, US, or Georgia?
Georgia, this is in the Emirates. Yeah. So it's a thing in Georgia, but it's a thing in many other countries. So it's important to be aware that gender bias using pre-implantation genetic diagnosis and screening can really screw with the sex ratio in a country. So obviously that's when legislation must come into place. Pre-implantation genetic screening, it's used for a lot more different things. So it's used to select the eye color of the child, it's used to select the hair color of the child. In the States, it's used to even select your child to be deaf or with dwarfism. If you're deaf, you just want your child to be deaf because you think that you would be a better mom if the child is deaf as well, you're allowed to choose that. It's tricky. It's because you think, well, is that really, should that be legal, or what are the ethics and the moral of that? And there's a lot of people who agree that they should be able to select their child to be deaf and or people with dwarfism. They believe that many of them in the States, they believe that they should be also allowed to have their child to be born with dwarfism as well. Because that, again, they will be just better parents by doing that. And so it's the right of choice as well. So many people would say, I want to be able to choose the gender, eye, skin, and hair color of my child, just designer babies, which is happening right now. In other cases, it's what's pre-implantation genetic screening is used to what's called savior siblings. So savior siblings is when, for instance, you have a child with leukemia, and then you want to have a second child with a bone marrow, who can be a bone marrow donor for the child with leukemia. The problem with that is that many people who get pregnant with that second savior child might just decide to have an abortion if the child or the embryo doesn't match genetically with the first child with leukemia. And also, how would the child feel if he was born just to save the first sibling and the parents didn't really want a second child? There is a lot of ethics into place, and it's a lot of considerations to take into account. Other people say that they have a hereditary condition, as I said before. Some people said that they just want the child to be just like them, and so on and so on. So there's a lot of...
Sarah,
yeah.
Is that genetic intervention with the embryo before implantation?
Yeah.
Would that be similar to the doctor in China that cloned a set of twins?
Yeah.
That was different because that was actually genetic engineering.
Cloning would
but
be,
this is only diagnosis and selection.
Yeah, so this is already, exactly, that's true. So genetic engineering would be more just changing the DNA. Well, cloning doesn't need to, with cloning you don't need to change the DNA. So it's big, but regardless, it has nothing to do with pre-implantation genetic screening. Pre-implantation genetic screening is with the embryos of the couple, all the embryos of the couple. You will select the ones that have certain conditions, or they meet certain characteristics. Yeah, it doesn't involve cloning or.
So they do all this stuff with racehorses now. So
yeah, they do that.
And I guess one of the challenges with this area is that a lot of companies make these overblown claims of the accuracy of their diagnosis, and a lot of conditions are extremely difficult to diagnose. Is affected by multiple genes.
Yeah. There is a movie that it's about My Sister's Keeper, which is about that, and it's a true story of she ended up getting a lawyer to stop because she got most of her life just being her sister's savior, and actually was a sister who didn't want that anymore, and he sent to her. It's a very strong movie.
Need to watch that one. So this is a case. It was years ago, but still happening. So there is a lesbian couple who will have a deaf baby by choice. The arguments were they're both mental health specialists and deaf therapists, and they have been together for nearly 10 years. They're a stable couple. They claim they will make better parents to a deaf child, and they say the choice is no different from opting for a certain gender. And they say also that they are part of a generation that views deafness not as a disability, but as a cultural identity.
Selfish. What about the rights of the child?
That's it. So
that's one sense. We have 5 senses.
Yeah.
That's one sense.
You're taken away.
Willfully taken away.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, you could argue that. You could argue that person is never going to listen to the waves of the ocean or the voice of the person they love, or it is a choice that you're making for the child. Yeah.
Then again, the parents have no sense.
There's a similar case with dwarfism.
Same case for dwarfism in the States? Yeah. Yeah.
Has that been okayed, or has it been controversial? Or?
That's been controversial, but it's happening. It's happening.
Sarah, when we say controversial, that suggests there are 2 sides to a coin. I'm just wondering if there was a camp that I'm not familiar with that was actually supporting this, and what arguments were made in support of this position. And the same with dwarfism. Is it just there was a legal loophole and therefore it happened, but it's sort of universally accepted that this is not appropriate, or was there genuinely an alternative position to one I'm not seeing now that supports decisions like this?
In some states, it's just a legislation gap. I'm not sure if I completely understood the question, but I think it is in the case of states, it's a legislation gap as well. Sometimes jurisdiction. Sometimes you just take it to the tribunal and they just They just create the law by themselves, so you just don't interpret the law, because it's not, this type of specific cases usually they're not covered by the law. It's usually someone who goes and interprets that case, and that case or that sentence becomes law itself. But
so following this event, was the law tightened up as a result of this, or?
After, no. I don't believe so. I don't believe so. I don't believe so, but I wouldn't be able to answer that information with confidence.
Yeah, sorry, maybe I can comment on that.
Yeah.
I think I understand your question, and I think the couple's argument is that, you know, they belong to this community that are very supportive, and for them, they would like the child to benefit from belonging to that community. And I guess in the US, you know, they have a lot more emphasis on individual freedom. But yeah,
prevented it coming into law because the waiting might have been.
Yep.
The last point covers this. We are part of a generation that views deafness not as a disability. So by producing a deaf child, they don't see it as disabling the child at all.
What is the definition?
Like a other language, so they are giving a language to their children.
Yeah.
But what's the definition of cultural identity? What do they mean by that?
I think that people who, the deaf community is a really tight community. When you don't have the sense of hearing, there's it's almost like they'll say that their perception of the world is different from people who can hear. And so they see the world differently. They've created a culture that's different around the fact that they can't hear. Their experiences are different, and you don't understand what it's like to be a deaf person unless you're a deaf person. And so if you're a couple and your family's like that, everyone around you is like that, you don't want to bring someone into your life, your family, your community, the whole group who feels like an outsider. You want your child to feel like they're an outsider. That would be the argument I would put.
See, to my way of thinking, and you know, I have a friend who is she's mute, so no hearing, no speaking, and especially no sign language by choice, and you know, was adopted. Parents allowed her not to do all that stuff. However, she is profoundly affected. She takes part in all our activities. Doesn't go to any deaf because she doesn't perceive that she's part of that. That's why I question cultural identity and the fact that these people have made the same with the autism. They've made a decision without the child being able to vote. And the child can't vote and say, hey, I opt out. I'll learn sign, you know, I'm fine, I'll do everything to communicate with you. But if I have hearing, you know, I'd appreciate that aspect of my life.
Right, and I'm going to play devil's advocate, but say that you could, I guess that somebody could argue and say, well, any child could argue and say, well, I didn't choose to be male or female or any other decision that ends up being that the parents choose. That, I mean, I'm devil's advocate.
Or to have hearing.
Right, or to have hearing. Yeah. I would have preferred not to have hearing and then feel exactly. I mean, that would be.
Well, you just blast your eardrums out.
Alright, I'm just gonna continue it. We can keep talking about it, but it's a controversial topic. Let's go to the maximum number of embryos transferred. So that's also a controversial topic in the industry. We're not going to cover all the controversial topics of the industry, the field, and it's really hard, but this is definitely one of them. There are risks associated to transferring too many embryos. In fact, there are countries where there is a single embryo transfer policy because multiple embryo transfers are too risky. They are risky for the mother, they're risky for the babies. There are people who just say, I just want to have the freedom of choice, and it's their money. In many countries, they pay in full for it because there is no government reimbursement, there is no Medicare, and they just pay in full. So they just want to have the freedom of choice. It's their bodies, it's their money, they just want to choose it. And some people just say it's a case by case, because depending on the age, if you're stronger, if you're in better health, you have less risks that someone who might be, having some some more issues than you might that older people might have. Like older people might have more issues than younger people, for instance.
And Sarah, what causes that risk? Is that physical damage with each transfer?
Physical damage. I do have some notes of things that might cause. So the increase, so it could be preeclampsia. There's a lot of things that I can't even pronounce. They're associated with prematurity, cerebral palsy, infant mortality. There is a lot of complications. There are some names here that I can't pronounce.
Is that complication in the child or in the mother?
In the child and also in the mother.
Oh, I see.
In the mother as well. If you see this photo, you will understand why the risks of the mother and the as well. So this is a woman who decided to have 12 embryos transferred. She was, sorry for the photo, maybe I should have advised it for just putting that in the big screen, but you know, it was her money, it was her body, so that's what many people argue. She went through IVF and requested the transfer of 12 embryos, despite of being informed, this was in the States as well, where everyone is valid. And despite of being informed by the fertility specialist that the recommended limit of embryos was 3, but she decided to have 12.
Sorry, I thought you meant consecutive, so you mean that
No, all at the same time. Yeah, all at the same time. That was very controversial. So she didn't want to keep paying for the frozen storage, so she asked the fertility specialist to transfer all of them. Those were 12 embryos. I know, it's funny or it's not. And she got pregnant with 8 octuplets. So this is the case of Solomon octuplets. The problem with this is that, I guess what's controversial about this case is that she was a single mom, and she was unemployed. She had nowhere to live. She also underwent, she did IVF, but she also had 6 kids before she did this. So in total she had 14 kids.
How did she afford it?
She couldn't afford it.
So was there any mental health screening before this?
Yeah.
Obviously an issue.
But in the other hand, there's been a lot of media following her up, and she's really
got a lot
tried.
of money out of this.
Yeah, a lot of media, and
a lot of money.
A lot of money, but she still couldn't manage, and she just got really like odd jobs. She goes, you know, she was a nude model. She also was a porn actress. And again, you know, yeah, it's so it is controversial. However, then you find again, it's her body, it's her decision. I'm just trying to play the devil's advocate here. I'm not saying, but again, trying to remain neutral. But you know, it was her body, it was her money. And for instance, just recently, just in Brisbane, there is a couple who's just murdered and tortured their baby, right? So, and they had the baby with no screenings, no psychological screenings or anything like that. So in this case, it was her money, it was her choice. I'm just trying to give you all the angles, right? Just so you know, because again, there is.
Are now heading straight into adolescence.
Fun?
Her children are now heading straight into adolescence.
Yep.
So they're 13 now.
Yep.
So that's not an easy period.
No, having so many teenagers, no. That's our problem. She was her choice.
She could use the other 6 to raise the other 8.
Potentially. I'm not sure if she was, I don't know, maybe she has that everything rationalized. Maybe not. It doesn't seem that she had, if you ask me, but she just wanted to have things. How old is she now? I don't know. She was, I think she might be like, she was definitely, to be able to do that, she was definitely below 30 years old. I'm pretty sure. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm sure she was under 30 to be able to do that. I can double check that later.
But besides it being her money and her body,
Yeah.
someone has accepted her money
Yes.
and agreed to do that.
That is true, which comes into place what I was saying before. She said, you're talking about the industry, an industry, not as a field. It's a very profitable industry, so sometimes if you know that they are going to pay the amount that she paid on first instance, they want to give her the freedom of choice. And it is, they just get, because if the doctor says to her, I'm not doing this, she might just go and say, I'm not paying you. So it's the profit, and go to someone else.
Yeah, but it's also the states, so.
And it's also the states, yeah, that's true.
Because it gets them flipped on its head if they then deny her. It's the states. You sue for discrimination.
Yeah, exactly. It could be. That's true. That is true. But yeah, so that's the.
But she's putting the lives of a lot of children at risk. There are reasons to stop her from doing that. I don't know whether she will win the case.
But if there's no law, like in the States, if there's no law passed and you just arbitrarily deny someone a service, that's often seen as discrimination.
Yeah, I mean that happened with like gay marriage cakes and
that's
things
right.
like that, right?
And they won those cases. So. Yeah, but that's probably more part of the law not keeping up with the technology because
it's really complex.
Yeah, it's complicated.
There is, and all the rights are, it's the rights of the mom to choose this, but what about the child, the rights of all these children to live in those conditions with no place to live. And I've watched videos of where she was living was a place where she was not paying the rent, so they were trying to kick her out of that place.
Yeah.
But it was a completely mess. So the children, the walls were completely, because the kids were just kids and they were just painting on the walls. She was just allowing everything, and it was a mess.
And see, that's normalised for them. How are they going to integrate into being happy, confident members of society if they have no knowledge of how to do that?
But that's tricky, and I don't want to play the devil's advocate here, but any other person could have a child and be a psycho or not have any emotional intelligence. That again, there is just recently, just 2 days ago, this couple murdered their own child, right? And they didn't even undergo IVF.
But we're not going to go down the path of the rising rates of the horrible, nasty, dark web type stuff, are we? But we can see where it's going. We've got a lot of homeless kids. Because there was a choice that could have been more controlled, for sure. That was the doctor just trying to prioritize his money instead of the safety of these people. Yeah. See, it's not about health. It's about money. Like you said, it's
about money.
Industry. It's not a field of medicine. It's an industry.
Yeah,
it's an unregulated industry.
Unregulated. It's highly regulated in some countries, but it's again the differences in legislation per country that allow the reproductive tourism that allows people, for instance, and we'll go through that later. An Australian couple went to Thailand to pay a surrogate in Thailand, and they just travel overseas, right? And that's what's happening. And it's the differences in regulation what's really bringing a lot of controversial debates worldwide, because it's really, really, really controversial.
But also in the States, I mean, the way the Bible would be used to justify all sorts of crazy things, which we can see at the moment.
Yeah.
With Christian fundamentalism. And what was interesting is the names of her children, which was Jeremiah and Noah,
Christian.
and they were biblical names, and the second name was Angel. I think you noticed that.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's a very weird set of circumstances in America, which.
It is strange, yeah. I think there is a polarization. It depends on what type of. Look, I'm not religious, so I don't have a deep understanding. But I guess with IVF, usually religion does not endorse IVF.
No.
But I do believe there is a community of religious people who do think religious people as in Christian
exactly,
people.
who would distort the Bible, go forth and multiply, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And take it literally, and just she becomes a kind of heroine, I'm sure, in many people's eyes.
Yeah, a little. Some people, some people they just think that they're just black sheeping something by just populating the world with their own children, or like the case of the sperm donor, or like the doctor. Yeah. It's just.
But
yeah.
that's why you get the expression only in America. I mean, because of their freedoms there.
But you do, counselling.
You get every kind of community. I've spent a lot of my career working in America, and you just travel across the country, and there's just these little different cultures everywhere. It's the way that. So anything you can be done, will be done in that place. It just will be. Right?
Definitely, the States is one bad example. I wanted to remain neutral this time.
Can I just ask a quick question that does relate, but it's often a tangent. Apparently, correct me if I'm wrong, but before you get married in the States, you have to both have blood tests, is that right?
Before you get married?
Yeah, so that you can determine.
In some states.
Yeah.
Not all states.
And
so you can just travel to another state. You don't require it.
And so the reasoning, the rationale for that is all about genetics, is it? Yeah. So we've got that happening.
It comes from before World War II, when they had a lot of Hitler's epigenetics in their heads and all that sort of stuff.
Guys, I'm just gonna keep going because we have 20 minutes left. Sorry, we just keep talking about it. But yeah, that's interesting because you can still have kids without getting married, right? So the use of surrogates. Surrogacy is an arrangement in which a woman who is the surrogate agrees to carry and give birth to a child on behalf of another person or couple. There are two types of surrogacy. Surrogacy can be traditional, which is in which the surrogate uses her own eggs. So the surrogate is the biological mother of the child, and then they use the sperm of one of the members of the couple. It can be a gay couple, or it can be an heterosexual couple. And there is also gestational surrogacy, which is where the surrogate is just hosting the baby. The egg and the sperm are coming from the couple, both of them. So some people decide that prohibition of commercial surrogacy is an infringement of women's rights because they should be paid. And some people just say that, how is that fair that commercial, how is it fair that fertility clinics can be paid thousands of dollars and a woman who is a surrogate cannot accept any compensation. But then there is some people who say that commercial surrogacy represents a form of control over women's bodies, and increases the chances of exploitation, which it's also true. Some people also think, on the other hand, just not going through whether you should be paid or not. Some people think that with traditional surrogacy, we should be giving rights to the surrogate. Traditional surrogacy is when the surrogate is the biological mother of the baby. So you should give rights to the surrogate since the biological parent. And other things to consider, again, as we've been saying all the time, is that you also need to consider the rights of the child, which is usually never considered. Usually the parents' decisions and the parents' decisions usually go first so far. So one case that we have for surrogacy that's an interesting one happened a few years ago in Australia. There was this couple who went to Thailand to hire a surrogate. This was a traditional surrogate, so the surrogate was using her own eggs, and she was paid money to just have babies. She got pregnant with twins, but one of the twins had Down syndrome. So the couple in Australia asked her to please abort this child and will keep the other one who is healthy. Because of her backgrounds and Buddhist backgrounds, she refused to do that. She refused to have an abortion, and she wanted to go ahead and have that child and raise that child with Down syndrome herself. So what happened in the end, the outcome was that the Australian couple came to Australia with the healthy baby, and the Thai woman kept the baby with Down syndrome. Again, what are the rights of, very controversial, what are the rights of the child, right? So if I grow up and I know that I have a sibling in Thailand who has Down syndrome and I never met, how would I feel? And how would I feel if I have Down syndrome and my parents rejected me and wanted me wanted my mom to abort me, and they also separated me from my sibling. Right? It's just having the rights of the children into account seems to be something that's not very common. And yeah, any thoughts on this, or I'll keep going. Use the sperm after death. So for this one, in Queensland and Australian Capital Territory, sperm can be removed where a designated officer has no reason to believe the deceased objected to the removal after death. This is without explicit consent. So if there is no explicit consent, they can actually do that. It's only if there is no reason to believe that they objected. In the United States, the consent has to be required, it has to be explicit. The posthumous sperm retrieval, it's quite straightforward in theory. So the doctor has to go to the mortuary, has to retrieve the sperm, and then the couple has to obtain permission, the woman has to obtain permission to transfer the stored sperm for IVF purposes. The problem here is sometimes the rights of obviously the right of the dead person, it's their right, so is in the end, if they didn't consent, having a baby of a dead person might be morally wrong. But there is also the rights of the people who are still alive, who are the family of the dead person, his parents, and also the partner, which might be sometimes they might be in conflict, which has been the case in many cases.
How often does this happen?
That's a good question. I wouldn't be able to give you a percentage, but it happens a lot. I think I can't give you a percentage, but just to give you an example, this happened last year in Queensland. So this couple in the Gold Coast, this is Champy, who is a snowboarder in Australia. He was well known for doing snowboard, and he died in the Gold Coast. Suddenly he had an accident, and she just moved really quickly and decided to retrieve the sperm of Alex Champy to have a baby. And this has kept happening. Just to answering kind of your question, I've been working in the industry for 4 or 5 years, and this has been an ongoing request, but it hasn't been more than maybe 1 or 2 a year. So we had 1 or 2 a year, but this is in Queensland only, right? So then how much is per internationally?
Is there any consideration as to whether they like to be an organ donor? Because it's a bit along the same lines, isn't it?
An organ donor?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it is similar. It's similar with the exception that an offspring, the rights of the child again. So how is the child going to feel if you know that your dad was dead when your mom conceived you? And how are you going to feel if your dad didn't really give explicit consent about it?
Excuse me, but I thought you said in Queensland you have to prove that the person will not object if you are alive. Do you not have to prove that?
You're not allowed
if you want to take the sperm of a dead person, you have to prove that if you are alive, you will not object. Don't you prove that?
Yeah, you don't have to. Yeah, you have to pretty much prove that somehow, let's say that there is no reason for you to believe that he objected.
Or that he wanted to have a child, you have to prove that.
In this case, this couple, in this case, they were undergoing IVF before he died, so that's reason enough to think he obviously wanted a child. But that's different to me. Wanting a child is different from wanting a child after death. That's a different question altogether.
And I think that is the matter of inheritance, like for the child, that because when you die, if you had a lot of money, possessions, then that child would be, entitled to it. So you have other considerations there as well.
That's definitely, which is sometimes, and the parents also might, that's when the parents of the dead person, the deceased might.
Marriage.
Yeah.
Just a partner, how you
Yeah, the parents and the siblings of the deceased, that's where all of those people start.
Children and, to share and all that.
Yeah.
An interesting thing here is that, like, if the donation was refused, then she might have found a new partner to have a child with.
She could have,
And
sure.
that child is raised with two parents, right?
Yeah.
And then by giving her this donation, it's like prevented that from happening, and a child is raised without a father.
And
yeah, I guess
certainly doing it a month within the time that the guy died. I mean, there's something funny about that.
Yeah, I mean, the couple, you know, they might be just when he died. I don't know anything about the personal relationship. Maybe when he died, she was in love. She just wanted to have a baby. They were already undergoing IVF, and she was just already sorry. She was already so she was already into the idea that she wanted a baby of him. So yeah, it sounds like I just had some helium or something. Sorry?
Her motivation would be affected by the fact that he was dead, and you know, to me it seems like she's trying to kind of hold on to him, you know. I don't know, to me there's something almost ghoulish about it.
I feel for her as well, because I think I read quite a bit about this case, and I think they've been together 8 years. His family were completely supportive, and so and they are sort of helping her raise this child. So there's like a big family environment, and there's a lot of people who don't have two parents for different reasons. And then there's like a lot of cases, like the book When Breath Becomes Air that was like a New York Times bestseller was about a doctor who discovered he was dying, and him and his wife decided to have a kid before he died. And he died a few months later, and you could sort of say, was that selfish as well, because the dad wasn't going to live, and he only got to meet the baby who was 3 months old when he died. But a lot of people would say that's fine. I don't know. I kind of, and also I think she was just devastated. The whole family was devastated by this freak accident. He was sort of spearfishing and basically, just died, freak and thing. And I think this baby has given them all hope. And I think, I don't know whether I would choose to do it or not. It seems like it's really positive motivation, and it's just made everyone really joyful, and there's a really beautiful little girl in the world.
Yeah, that is really cool. But yeah, for sure, there is a lot of things to take into account. And one of the things as well is the right of the baby, how would he feel? I guess it depends on all of the education that you give to the baby as well, right? And if it's raised to in a family that's really teaching how that was out of love, really, even though his dad passed away, but the decision was out of love, and you know, I guess it's just education. I guess it will play a big role there, but this is quite. It was happening about once, twice a year where I used to work, and I'm sure it's more common nationwide and even more worldwide.
The other thing to consider is the only way you ever stop something like that is through oral regulation, and how then you have to ask yourself the question: how much intervention do you want our legislators, politicians, to have in family formation? That's creepy too.
Yeah, I think it's more. I don't know. I think looking at when there is gaps in legislation, I think that's where really bad things happen, rather than not having that regulated. But of course, there is a lot of controversy, and it depends on the regulation. You know how patriarchal are you going to be? Be in terms of legislation.
In that example, you have to be pretty patriarchal to stop the lady having her kid.
Yeah.
And that would be that'd be a fairly ferocious law. You would have to pass to stop that. And it could be misused, but at the same time, do you want to restrict through legislation, that sort of thing? You start to get into creepy overreach territory as well. So it's hard to know where the dial should be drawn.
It's true,
And finally, again, there is a lot of more controversial topics, but age limits is also one of them. So IVF and assisted reproductive technologies allow women to get pregnant in the 50s, 60s, and even 70s. So some people will argue that a child has a right to safe childhood and adolescence, and if the mother dies or she's ill, how is she going to take care of the child? But then other people say that a woman should have the right to choose when she was a child, and an upper age limit means formalized age discrimination, which is also a good point, isn't it? Some people say also that the woman and the fetus are at increased risk with advancing maternal age, and also with secular trends and improved physical health in upper middle age, the prerequisites of being a healthy and active mother have improved. Again, all of this is true, and yet they're in conflict, right? Some people say as well that if there is public financing of IVF, this argument includes cost effectiveness and prioritization deliberations. Prioritization, I guess, one really good example can be if there is a waiting list, if there is a government reimbursement and there is a waiting list, are you going to prioritize women who are at less risk than women who are at more risk, like women in their 70s? That's the angle there. So some cases is Australia's oldest IVF mother had a baby at the age of 62 years old. The oldest women getting pregnant was 74 years old and gave birth to twins, because with IVF there is a risk of multiple pregnancies, and so she had twins after IVF, and there is discrepancies there, right? Who's gonna run behind the child? I don't know. And, but also there is other people who, again, it's their decision, it's their choice. They can also, they might be also more mature. That just gives the child a different perspective than from a younger parent. There is pros and cons to it.
Children healthy, like,
They're healthy. Yeah, they're healthy. The two children are healthy. Yeah. She might not be for much longer, but the two children are healthy. Yeah.
This is a classic case of sociology trying to override biology. I mean, you weren't designed to do this. It's,
yeah.
Do you know when women are at their most fertile?
Most.
Not saying intellectually ready.
Early
16
20s.
years of age.
16.
16 years of age. Dead set.
Yeah.
biology says.
But that's not going to happen, right? This is a trend now, like the graph that I showed you before. There is a trend of women delaying pregnancy for sure, not just in Australia, but also worldwide. And not just delaying pregnancy, but also there is a higher infertility rates, not just again in Australia, but worldwide. And that also leads to, doesn't lead to, but there is as a consequence as well of the same, is there is lower birth rates as well worldwide and in Australia. A mixture of lower birth rates with and a mixture of higher infertility rates means that we potentially might need just more education in the field and just trying to understand better the pros and cons of doing this and what and that, and also understanding what are the controversies in different topics of the industry or different areas in the industry, which again they are very controversial, and the difference in the legislation are just very varied. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. There is a lot more topics that we could talk about, like stem cell research, reproductive cloning, genetic engineering and editing, which is also IVF will be required as well, so it is related to this topic. Sex ratio distortions we've already covered. Fertility preservation is a big topic as well. What's the eligibility criteria for fertility preservation? And